Have you ever stopped to consider the intoxicating, almost terrifying paradox of absolute power, that sometimes the one ignored, humiliated, and spat upon by the entire world is ultimately the sole reason the king survives? Picture, if you will, a grand hall dripping in gold and diamonds, filled with apex predators who could tear a human apart in seconds, yet all of them utterly blind to the truth bleeding at their very feet. Wolf King Stories warmly welcomes you to a tale of blood, betrayal, and absolute reckoning. Before we step deeper into the lethal shadows of the Obsidian Keep, if you find yourself captivated by stories where the lowest of the low rise to shatter the heavens, please hit that subscribe button to support the channel. Your support is the very heartbeat that gives us the motivation to keep bringing these magnificent legends to life. I have always believed that there is a primal, undeniable satisfaction in witnessing an underdog endure the unimaginable, because the fire of their vengeance is forged in the deepest, darkest pits of humiliation. Nowhere is this truth more suffocating than in the grand, unforgiving halls of Alpha King Kael Draven. The Great Hall is a towering monument to predatory opulence. Immense pillars of black marble stretch toward a vaulted ceiling painted with the winter constellations. Chandeliers forged from pure gold and dripping with thousands of faceted diamonds cast a blinding, deceitful light over the gathered elite. The air itself is a weapon thick, heavy, and nearly unbreathable with the competing scents of roasted venison, spiced honey wine, and the cloying, aggressive pheromones of werewolf nobility. A frantic, tempestuous waltz echoes off the cold stone walls, completely masking the venomous whispers and political machinations of the highborn alphas and lunas, who spin across the polished floor in a blur of silk, velvet, and unearned arrogance. In this ruthless world, to be weak is to be a ghost waiting to be exorcised. To be an unranked, seemingly human servant is to be less than the dirt beneath their boots. Then there is Elena. She moves through the extreme edges of this grand ballroom like a bruised shadow, clad in the drab, coarse gray linen of the scullery class. Her head is bowed, her shoulders hunched, a heartbreaking physical manifestation of a life spent flinching, constantly anticipating the heavy hands and cruel fangs of her betters. She carries a heavy silver tray laden with crystal goblets of blood-red wine, her slender, fragile arms trembling slightly under the immense, unyielding weight. To the nobility, Elena is not a breathing soul with hopes or dreams. She is merely an interactive prop existing solely for their fleeting convenience and cruel amusement. You must understand the profound, agonizing psychological weight of her existence here. I want you to feel the sharp sting of her absolute invisibility. Notice the way a heavily jeweled lord carelessly elbows her, nearly sending her sprawling, without offering even a glance backward to acknowledge his strike. But the true nightmare begins with Lady Seraphina. She is a high-born she-wolf with a heart as terrifyingly cold as her ice-blue gown. With a cruel, intentional smirk, Seraphina extends a satin-clad foot into the shadow's path. Elena trips. Time seems to agonizingly slow down as the heavy tray tips from her grasp. The crystal goblets shatter against the immaculate black marble with a deafening, violent crash that slices through the orchestra's music. The crimson wine splatters violently across the hem of Seraphina's pristine dress, looking indistinguishable from fresh, spilled blood. Seraphina's voice cuts through the sudden, suffocating hush like a serrated blade, condemning her as a clumsy, worthless wretch. Elena immediately drops to her trembling knees, her bare hands desperately trying to gather the jagged shards of glass. The broken crystal bites deeply into her palms, slicing her skin, but that physical agony is utterly eclipsed by the crushing weight of the sudden, predatory attention. A circle of nobles forms around her, their eyes flashing with a feral, monstrous cruelty. They sneer, swirling their drinks, mocking her as a stray dog, questioning aloud why their king allows such pathetic, scentless trash to breathe their air. Then comes the ultimate degradation. Seraphina steps forward and deliberately brings her sharp heel down, grinding it mercilessly into Elena's bleeding, glass-filled hand against the unforgiving marble. Elena bites her lower lip so hard she tastes copper. forcing back a scream that threatens to tear her throat apart. She swallows her tears, her pride, her very soul, burying the immense, suffocating injustice deep within her hollow chest. This is the ultimate psychological crucible. Every insult, every cruel laugh, every drop of innocent blood spilled on that floor acts as a tightly coiled spring of resentment in our minds. We are forced to endure her degradation with her, cultivating a ferocious, desperate craving for validation and vengeance. The stage is set, perfectly and excruciatingly, for a reckoning that will drown them all. Yet, the universe has a violently poetic way of intervening just when the darkest hour seems absolute, fracturing the illusion of safety with a single, deafening breach. The heavy oak doors of the Great Hall do not simply open, they are blown off their massive iron hinges, sending lethal splinters of wood raining down upon the stunned nobility. I have often marveled at how quickly arrogance evaporates in the face of genuine, unadulterated terror. The intoxicating scent of spiced wine and expensive perfumes is instantly overpowered by the caustic, burning stench of wolfsbane and rotting flesh. A terrifying legion of rogue assassins, draped in tattered black cloaks and wielding blades glowing with toxic silver runes, floods into the opulent sanctuary like a river of nightmares. These are not mere thugs, they are elite killers, moving with a synchronized, unnatural speed that speaks of dark magic and suicidal devotion. I want you to observe the immediate, pathetic reaction of the highborn alphas and lunas who, only moments ago, strutted around like untouchable gods. Panic, raw and humiliating, seizes the room. The very lords who mocked Elena's frailty now shove their own mates into the path of the encroaching blades, desperate to buy themselves a few more seconds of life. Lady Seraphina, the cruel architect of Elena's torment, shrieks in abject horror, scrambling backward like a frightened rodent, and abandoning every ounce of her regal composure as she cowers behind a shattered marble pillar. It is a nauseating display of cowardice that reveals the rotting core of this so-called elite society. They are paper tigers, utterly incapable of defending the king they claim to serve. Through the chaos, Alpha King Kael Draven finally moves. He is a magnificent, terrifying force of nature, a towering tempest of muscle, fangs, and lethal grace. He sheds his velvet coat, his eyes igniting with the molten gold of his dominant wolf, and he leaps into the fray. For a breathless moment, he is magnificent. He tears through the first wave of assassins with devastating precision, snapping necks and shattering chests. But the sheer volume of the attackers is overwhelming, and their tactics are dishonorable. They do not fight him one-on-one, they swarm him like a plague of locusts. A rogue hurls a glass vial that erupts into a dense cloud of concentrated wolfsbane gas, blinding the king and suffocating his extraordinary senses. As Kael stumbles, gasping for untainted air, the lead assassin seizes the opening. A cruel, jagged blade coated in black venom slices violently across the king's ribcage. The sickening sound of tearing flesh echoes above the screams. Kael drops to one knee, a primal roar of agony tearing from his throat as the paralyzing poison immediately goes to work, seizing his muscles and freezing the blood in his veins. The apex predator, the invincible monarch of the Obsidian Keep, has fallen. The remaining guards are pinned down or dead, and the cowardly nobles remain paralyzed in their hiding spots, merely watching their ruler bleed out on the freezing floor. It is a moment of profound, paralyzing despair. The king is completely unguarded, defenseless, and only seconds away from a brutal decapitation. In this vast room of hundreds of powerful werewolves, there is not a single soul brave enough to step forward and intercept the killing blow. As the invincible Alpha King collapses, choking on his own blood, the absolute cowardice of the nobility is starkly illuminated, leaving only the broken scullery maid to change the tides of fate. Elena is still kneeling on the floor, her hands bleeding freely from the glass Seraphina had ground into her flesh. She should be terrified. She should be using this distraction to crawl away into the shadows and save her own miserable life. But as she watches the assassin raise his venomous blade over the paralyzed king, something entirely unexpected fractures within her mind. I believe there is a dormant trigger inside those who have suffered the longest, a breaking point where fear burns away, leaving only an incomprehensible, reckless defiance. The scent of Kael's spilling blood does not frighten her. Instead, it acts as a bizarre, electric catalyst that violently awakens a dormant, ancient lineage sleeping deep within her battered veins. Time slows to an agonizing crawl. Elena does not think, she simply reacts. The trembling, invisible servant vanishes, replaced by a blur of desperate, ferocious motion. She lunges forward, launching her small, seemingly fragile body directly between the towering assassin and the fallen king. It is a move so profoundly suicidal that the assassin hesitates for a fraction of a second, utterly baffled by the sight of a gray-clad maid attempting to thwart him. In that minuscule window of confusion, Elena's hand still slick with her own blood and embedded with shards of crystal shoots upward. She drives the jagged, makeshift glass weapon directly into the assassin's throat with a terrifying, unnatural strength that should not belong to a human. The killer gurgles, dropping his sword as he collapses backward, clutching his ruined neck. But there are others. 3 more rogues charge forward, howling in fury at the death of their leader. What happens next is a sequence I can only describe as a beautifully violent ballet of survival. The air around Elena seems to warp and crackle with a sudden, suffocating pressure. Her eyes, usually cast down in submission, now flare with a blinding, ethereal silver light. She is not shifting into a wolf, but she is channeling an aura so immensely powerful that the marble floor beneath her bare feet begins to crack. She scoops up the fallen silver sword with terrifying ease, moving with a lethal, fluid grace that makes a mockery of the royal guard's training. She deflects a fatal strike meant for Kael's heart, spinning and slicing through the tendons of her attacker before driving the hilt into the skull of the next. She is a tempest of vengeance and protective fury, shielding the massive king with her tiny, bruised frame. A rogue manages to graze her shoulder with a poisoned dagger, but Elena does not even flinch. The venom that brought down an Alpha King seems to burn out the moment it touches her strange, luminescent blood. She fights like a demon clawing its way out of hell, her every movement fueled by a lifetime of suppressed rage and agonizing injustice. When the final rogue falls, utterly destroyed by her relentless counterattack, an eerie, terrifying silence reclaims the great hall. Elena stands panting, entirely drenched in the blood of her enemies, the silver sword dangling from her ruined hands. She has just achieved the impossible, doing what an entire room of apex predators was too terrified to even attempt. In the eerie, suffocating silence that follows the slaughter, the heavy veil of deception finally burns away, exposing a truth that no one in the Obsidian Keep is prepared to witness. The surviving nobles slowly begin to creep out from behind their pillars and overturned tables, their faces painted with a sickening mixture of shock, confusion, and profound shame. They stare at the small, blood-soaked figure in the center of the room as if she were a ghost conjured from their darkest nightmares. Kael Draven, fighting through the agonizing paralysis of the venom, forces his heavy head upward. His golden eyes lock onto the back of the trembling scullery maid who just saved his life. I want you to feel the intense magnetic shift in the atmosphere at this exact moment. As Elena's adrenaline begins to fade, she staggers, the immense magical exertion finally taking its toll on her malnourished body. She drops the sword, and it clatters loudly against the stone. Blood drips from her fingertips, pooling on the floor and mixing with the king's own spilled blood. And then, the most extraordinary phenomenon occurs. As their blood mingles on the marble, a scent erupts into the air, a fragrance so rich, so intoxicating and dominant, that it forces every single werewolf in the room to involuntarily bare their necks in submission. It is not the scent of a human. It is the unmistakable, ancient aroma of royal Lycan blood, pure and unadulterated. The legends speak of a lost bloodline, a lineage of white wolves possessing magic capable of neutralizing any poison and an aura that commands kings. Kael's breath hitches. The venom is burning out of his system, neutralized merely by breathing in the proximity of her awakened power. He stares at her, the realization crashing down upon him with the force of a tidal wave. This abused, invisible creature who cleaned their floors and took their beatings is not only a Lycan of the highest royal decree, but as the golden threads of the mate bond abruptly snap into place within his chest, he realizes she is his fated equal, the very soul the moon goddess created for him. The horror that washes over the faces of the nobility is an absolute feast for the eyes. You can practically hear the collective realization shattering their arrogant minds. Lady Seraphina, whose exquisite gown is still stained with the wine she forced Elena to spill, turns a ghostly, sickly shade of pale. Her jaw trembles as she looks at the bloody imprint of her own heel, still visible on the hand of the girl who is now radiating an aura vastly superior to her own. The lords who sneered, the ladies who laughed, the entire court that treated her as less than dirt they are, all suddenly drowning in the suffocating realization of their own fatal mistake. They haven't just been abusing a servant, they have been torturing their rightful queen. Elena turns around slowly, her silver eyes locking with Kael's golden ones. There is no fear left in her gaze, only a profound, exhausted sorrow that cuts deeper than any blade. With the undeniable bond of the fated mates now hanging heavily in the blood-soaked air, the time for enduring silent humiliation violently reaches its absolute end. King Kael pushes himself entirely off the floor, his colossal frame towering over the stunned assembly. His wounds are already closing, knitting together under the miraculous influence of Elena's proximity. He does not look at his guards, nor does he acknowledge the whimpering nobles. He walks slowly, deliberately, toward the trembling girl in the gray linen dress. When he reaches her, this terrifying alpha, a man who bows to absolutely no one, drops to one knee amidst the glass and gore. He gently, almost reverently, takes her ruined, bleeding hands into his own massive palms. The contrast is heart-wrenching, his absolute devotion replacing a lifetime of her brutal subjugation. "My mate," Kael's voice rumbles, a deep, resonant sound that vibrates through the very foundations of the Obsidian Keep. "My queen." The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. A collective gasp ripples through the hall, but Kael is not finished. He rises, pulling Elena up with him, tucking her small, battered frame firmly against his side. His golden eyes sweep across the room, shedding the tenderness he showed her and replacing it with a murderous, unyielding fury. I find a deeply poetic justice in what happens next. He demands absolute submission. "On your knees," Kael commands, utilizing the full, crushing weight of his alpha aura. It is not a request, it is a physical force that slams into the nobility, forcing them down. One by one, the arrogant lords and cruel ladies collapse onto the hard marble, their foreheads pressed to the stone in desperate supplication. All except Seraphina. Paralyzed by a toxic cocktail of pride and terror, she remains standing, her legs shaking uncontrollably. "My king, surely there is a mistake," she stammers, her voice shrill and desperate. "She is trash, she is a nobody." Before Kael can unleash his wrath, Elena steps forward. She does not shout, she does not need to. The silver luminescence returns to her eyes, and the oppressive weight of her newly awakened Lycan aura violently crashes down specifically upon Seraphina. It is a spiritual suffocation. Seraphina chokes, her hands flying to her throat as her knees buckle, sending her crashing down directly onto the shattered crystal she had forced Elena to clean up. The physical pain is nothing compared to the complete psychological destruction of her ego. Elena looks down at her tormentor, not with malice, but with a cold, absolute indifference that is infinitely more devastating. To Elena, Seraphina is no longer a threat. She is merely an insect that has outlived its venom. This is the beautiful, terrifying crucible of reckoning. The invisible shadow has not just stepped into the light, she has become the sun, blinding and burning all those who thrived in the darkness of their own cruelty. As Kael drapes his own royal velvet coat over Elena's shivering shoulders, claiming her before the gods in the court, we are left to witness the ultimate triumph of the broken. They thought they could bury her under a mountain of humiliation, oblivious to the fact that she was a seed of divine royalty, merely waiting for the right amount of blood to finally bloom. The hierarchy of the Obsidian Keep has been permanently shattered, rewritten by the bruised hands of a scullery maid who proved that true power is never born from unearned arrogance, but forged in the unforgiving fires of survival. In the grand tapestry of the Obsidian Keep's history, the tale of Elena, the scullery maid turned royal Lycan Queen, serves as a monumental testament to the endurance of the abused and the fragility of unearned arrogance. When the darkest hour arrived, it was not the glittering nobility or the heavily armed guards who stood their ground against the horde of venomous assassins. It was the very soul they had spent a lifetime degrading. Elena's breathtaking transformation from an invisible, bleeding servant into a tempest of divine, protective fury completely shattered the established hierarchy of her world. By stepping between the fallen Alpha King and certain death, she exposed the rotting core of a society built entirely on superficial cruelty and cowardice. King Kael's immediate, reverent submission to his fated mate solidified a brutal reckoning for those who once tormented her, particularly Lady Seraphina, who was forced to violently choke on her own toxic pride. Ultimately, this story is a beautiful, terrifying crucible that proves true supremacy does not lie in a stolen crown, a velvet gown, or a prestigious title, but in the unbreakable resilience forged within the unforgiving fires of suffering. Elena did not merely rise from the ashes, she became the consuming fire that purified a corrupted kingdom, reminding us all that the most extraordinary light often emerges from the deepest, most suffocated darkness. Profound lesson and modern application. The deepest lesson woven into Elena's journey is that true strength is enduring, patient, and often hidden beneath layers of hardship, whereas arrogance is merely a fragile mask for cowardice. In our modern lives, we may not face rogue assassins or possess glowing silver magic, but we navigate complex societal hierarchies every day in our workplaces, schools, and communities. We can apply this lesson by fundamentally shifting how we treat others and value ourselves. Never underestimate or mistreat those who hold lesser positions or seemingly lack influence, because you never know the immense potential, talent, and resilience sleeping within them. Treat every single person with dignity. Furthermore, if you are currently enduring a period of hardship, mistreatment, or feeling entirely invisible, realize that these trials are your personal crucible. They are forging a profound inner strength that will eventually empower you to rise above your circumstances. True power is never granted by bullying others. It is earned through empathy, courage, and the refusal to let the world's cruelty extinguish your inner light. Question for you. If you found yourself in Elena's shoes, surrounded by people who had constantly mistreated you, would you have chosen to risk your life to save the king? Or would you have used the chaos as an opportunity to quietly escape? Please kindly share your thoughts and perspectives in the comments section below, so we can all discuss and learn from each other's viewpoints. If you enjoyed this story and its hidden lessons, please hit the subscribe button to support the channel. Your subscription is the greatest motivation for us to continue creating and bringing you more captivating stories and meaningful content in the future.